We give him so much flack, like, oh, maybe he just enjoyed his mom's cooking a little too much. Even one of his coaches said that at one point. Bill, on the right is what Luka looks like right now. What do you make of that?
Yeah, he looks like a Marvel superhero. What I make of it, he finally mixed in some salads, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. You're right. He looks – this is terrifying for the rest of the NBA, because even though Luka has reported overweight before, a little out of shape, he's still been ridiculously dynamic, Amanda. I can't imagine the level this guy can get to as he gets older. Still a very young dude, and as you just pointed out, if he shows up looking like that for the start of the season.
Yeah, that's what we hope, at least for the start of the season. It's going to last throughout the summer there. All right, so the odds are out to win MVP. Luka is the co-favorite, as I mentioned, with Joel Embiid. They are both plus 600, followed up by Giannis and then Nikola Jokic there. Do you think he has the potential to be MVP next season?
Yeah, I do. I've said for years, and this is just me parroting what other folks around the NBA have told me, he's talented enough, and this isn't easy, but he's talented enough to be a multi-time MVP, and very few people in the history of the sport have done that. Now, I do think that as someone who votes and is friends with a lot of the folks who vote, I think there's a slight edge to Joel Embiid, because I think too often, I think it's a mistake, Amanda, but I think too often what didn't happen in the past or should have happened in the past impacts voting in the future and when he becomes the president. I think there's going to be a sympathy vote for Embiid, the fact that he did not win this past year, and I did not vote for him. So I think it's between Luka and Embiid in terms of the most value, but there's no doubt that when you look at that list and you talk about the best players in the NBA, Luka Doncic has as much talent as any of those guys, and maybe more upside, given the fact that he's younger than all of them and is on a Dallas Mavericks team that if they can craft the right roster, if they can get the right pieces, this is a team that can look like a contender in the regular season. Obviously, they made the Western Conference Finals this past year, but looking like a contender is a big part of getting votes, because the votes go in before the playoffs begin.
Yeah, you saw that graphic right there. 46 triple-doubles in his first 4 seasons in the NBA, the most since Magic did it from 79 to 83. And then, of course, you got Joel Embiid saying, look, if I didn't win it last season, I feel like they hate me. We'll see about this upcoming season. All right, so we're going to look ahead to the Mavs, and we're going to try to make Luka the MVP by making the Mavs get some wins here. Let's talk about first, though, their salary cap situation. It's not great, Bill.
No, it's not. So the short version is that to bring in some of the players, Amanda, that we're probably going to talk about, right? Some of the names out there, and Bradley Beal's going to stay in Washington, but is Zach LaVine or Bradley Beal or DeAndre Ayton, anybody of significance, if Jalen Brunson leaves, what that in effect does is it triggers the absolute hard cap. And so in order for the Mavericks to go out and get a player to replace Jalen Brunson, if as expected he goes somewhere else and the Knicks sound like the front runner, they would have to send out not just the salaries to make that work in terms of matching what LaVine would make in a sign and trade. Let's say it's LaVine, whoever it is, in a sign and trade with the organization that's sending a player. They'll have to add some extra money so that they can operate and bring in some guys at the minimum. So you're talking some combination of Spencer Dinwiddie, Tim Hardaway Jr., those kind of players as a starting point. And then other players would have to be sent out as well as part of that deal or other deals. So you can go out, you can try to be aggressive in getting some of these big free agents that are out there, but it's really, really hard. You have to have the cooperation of whatever team that you're working with if there's a sign and trade, and you have to move on a whole bunch of contracts. Maybe Bertans you see there. They're obviously not going to move on from Christian Wood. It's not an easy situation, but Dinwiddie and Hardaway Jr. almost certainly would have to go out to bring in a superstar level player to pair with Luka Doncic.
We'll talk about some of those pairings first, but I want to talk about Jalen Brunson. You mentioned the Knicks are the front runner right now to land him. Of course, his dad is an assistant coach there. How do the Mavs hang on to him? And in your opinion, should they try to hold on to Jalen Brunson?
Yeah, great questions with, I think, really, really difficult answers. The first part of that is and you noted that the Knicks, this is a college basketball move. They hired his dad. The betting odds are that he's going to be a Knick. The sense around the NBA and people I talk to is he's going to be a New York Knick. So Dallas has to sell him on the idea that there's a place for him and they can win together. The problem is that Jalen Brunson's numbers were markedly better when he didn't play with Luka Doncic. Doncic is amazing, but he has the ball in his hands a lot, has a huge usage rate. He likes to be not just the facilitator, but the guy that holds the ball for huge chunks of time. So Brunson may believe, and maybe rightfully so, he can't be the best version of himself with Luka Doncic. And then the question of whether or not, let's say that Brunson's willing to stay, should they? In a normal situation, Amanda, in a vacuum, I think I personally would tell you no. I'm not sure I've seen enough from Jalen Brunson to believe he's worth the level of money he's going to command. The problem becomes the cap situation we just talked about. With Jalen Brunson leaves, they're still in cap hell. It's still a nightmare. It's still really difficult to operate. So Jalen Brunson is better, even if you run the risk of overpaying him, and that's not a universal view. It just happens to be mine. But he's better overpaying Brunson or taking the risk you're overpaying him than having to deal with the possibility you can't get much in return because you have to move all these other guys out to make way for somebody else.
So let's say he goes, or maybe he doesn't. But let's look at some players that we could potentially pair Luka up with. And I want you to talk about what Luka would look like with them, what that pairing would look like, but then also give me maybe a percentage chance on the likelihood that this happens. Let's start with Zach LaVine.
I mean, I love, look, if you could make it work, I love Zach LaVine with Luka Doncic. He needs a star. He needs a co-star. He needs a little help in terms of the offensive load that he has to carry. I think it would be a remarkable fit, and I think it would be an insanely dynamic backcourt that would be not impossible to guard, but certainly good enough from a talent perspective, especially over time if you surround them with some shooters and really with some defensive players and some length that could be a real competitor. And we just saw Luka Doncic carry his team to the Western Conference Finals on his own. So it looks great on paper and probably in practice. It's very difficult to do. This is basically what has to happen. You would have to get the Chicago Bulls to agree to the sign and trade, which they may not want to do. They may not want to facilitate that because the Bulls built their entire future around LaVine. I think there's a chance LaVine leaves, possibly, but the Bulls aren't going to want to help him do it. It triggers that hard cap, Amanda, we just talked about in terms of how the contracts work. So you have to send out probably Dinwiddie and Hardaway. Depends what LaVine wants, but if he wants the full max, which he's entitled to and he's earned, you're talking in the neighborhood in year one, $39-40 million a year because you get that 8% raise per year over that 4-year deal. That's Dinwiddie and Hardaway just to make the numbers work. But I don't see why the Bulls would want those players. So you probably have to involve a third team. You probably have to attach picks if you're the Mavs to move on some of those contracts. You lose that depth, and you still have to move on some more money to get under the cap to operate some other players in terms of bringing in roster spots. So I'll go 6.75%, just under 7% that it can happen.
I was going to say maybe 20, but no, not even. We're going with under 7%. Very, very small. Yeah. Okay, Mavs fans, you got that out of your system. What about Bradley Beal? Same questions there.
So I actually thought this had a higher likelihood and possibility of success. It's the exact same problem, right? The Mavericks don't have the cap space to go sign Bradley Beal. If he decided to not stick around in Washington, they would have had to facilitate a sign and trade with Washington. Now, you would have assumed the Wizards might be more willing to play ball because you want something in return, and they have such a great relationship with Beal that we've seen organizations over the years. If a guy wants to leave and there's a pretty good relationship there, they'll facilitate that. Think Kevin Durant leaving the Warriors. The Warriors got things in return, but they were also willing to do Durant a solid 2-time Finals MVP for them. The problem becomes the reports out there and the expectations that Beal's going to stick around, take the full 5-year max, which obviously you can only take if you stay with your current team. So I like the idea. It has the same difficulties in terms of the cap and sending things away. I think it was actually a better fit than Zach LaVine. I think Bradley Beal is a top, I won't say 5. I think he's a potential top 10 player in the NBA if he's in the right situation. People just haven't noticed his ridiculous offensive excellence, and he's a great locker room guy. But the fact Bradley Beal's expected to stay in Washington, D.C. makes it really unlikely. He'd have to change his mind. So we'll go 1.5%, Amanda, on this particular possibility.
We've gone from 7% to 1.5%. You're killing the Mavericks' hopes and dreams right now. Man, and combine those, less than 10%. Okay, one that is going to happen. I mean, Christian Wood's already there. Can we go with 90, 95% and talk about him the upcoming season with Luka?
You know what? 99% Mavs fans. I'm sorry that I haven't been positive enough. Let's lean in some positivity. The glass isn't half full. It's 99% full. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a player that they went out and they got and they feel really good about. I like Christian Wood a lot. I think he's a really nice player. I think he's probably gravely underappreciated because he was on a pathetic's probably an unkind word, but that's what came to mind, Amanda. A terrible team this past season. But I don't think he's good enough to be the second best option, the second best offensive option on a championship team. So for me, Wood is the kind of guy, if he gets in the right culture, if he's on a winning team, if he's not a Houston Rocket, right? If you're with a Dallas team that has upside, that is the third player on a team is capable of being the third best player on a championship level team. So I think you have to add more, right? The names that we've talked about. But the thing about Christian Wood that I think is encouraging, even though everybody wants to win now, is if the Mavericks can't get the pieces they want, a secondary star this year, if you can't get Zach LaVine, if you can't get Bradley Beal, if my percentages are right and it's not going to happen, Wood's a really nice piece for Luka this upcoming season, but he's also young enough and good enough that gives you some time. You want to operate and building a team around Luka Doncic successfully, but that might be a 2 or 3 year timeline. You don't want to overreact in the moment and make a mistake. That's a really nice piece. It's a really good player, and he's going to fit with that team, I think, for a long time. They've got to add more, but Christian Wood's a really nice addition by that front office.
So the Mavs have some chess pieces to move around here. I don't remember how to play chess. I think so. But anyway, okay, so what, with these pieces that they have and the mobility that they have and their cap situation, maybe a veteran free agent that they should target?
Okay, so this is where you get into, because again, they're going to try to go make some big moves, and they're just in a really difficult cap situation. So these aren't really sexy big names. But I thought Andre Drummond had a really nice season when he went to Brooklyn. I know that modern NBA does not really covet real centers, true centers, old school centers, but the guy can rebound, which is something you always need on a competitive team. He's well respected, he's tough, and he'll get you some easy buckets, especially with all the attention that you're going to have to pay to Luka Doncic. So I think that's just a reliable player, not a huge difference maker, but a reliable player. And I think DeMarcus Cousins is pretty interesting. I thought there were times where he played really well as the backup center behind one of the best players in the NBA in Denver. So he's aware and familiar what it means and what it takes to basically, and this is where he's at in his career, play with one of the best players in the game and just play the role you have to play. I think those are the kind of names that the Mavs have to look at when you talk about veteran guys that are much more affordable, that aren't overwhelming difference makers, but maybe are small pieces that can be helped.
Okay, odds for the Mavericks before free agency begins. Of course, they made it to the conference finals, ended up losing to the Warriors. They are plus 850 to win the West, 16-1 odds to win the NBA title, plus 1,600. What do you think about their odds right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the odds are probably where they should be. I think it was a really good bet maybe last year, and it might be, we can't do this. If I could bet on the Mavs to win an NBA championship a year or two from now, at whatever the number would be, I would be pretty interested in that. I'm skeptical, as we've discussed here, that they're going to be able to get that secondary star, that next level guy in this current 2022 free agency